Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, we tend to forget that as human beings we love the tactile, the physical, the things we can feel and have in our hands, and if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with, once again, you're not alone in feeling that way, because we're all swimming against the digital tide, and like I said, you're in the seats with once more. And it's a podcast, basically, where we talk to a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and pick their brain about current projects, the state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and conversational fashion. Because quite frankly, that's how we like to do things. And if you like how we do things, I'm assuming you do, you're listening to us right now, you can find us over at Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, basically wherever you get your podcasts. If you could subscribe to us there, that'd be great. And also, if you missed anything, we also archive everything over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there, that would be great. Also, you can follow us on social media at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of updates on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And also TikTok. We're on TikTok at In the Seats as well now. I'm not sure why yet, but we're on TikTok. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please give us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, video on demand, film festivals, and basically anything else in between, because we love talking about the moving image, and we love it when you come by and read about it. So please come on by. On this episode, boy, though, this is one that speaks to our heart, because as you well know, we are proud purveyors of physical media. Usually in the movie business, it's DVDs and Blu-rays, but it's everything. And we had a documentary come across our desk that really kind of speaks to sort of that need for the tactile and that need for the physical. It's called An Impossible Project, and it's just a reminder that people are yearning for real things and authenticity. It's a film about sort of the spirit and the pride of analog things sort of swimming against the digital tide. And it follows the story of an Austrian scientist who actually saved the world's last Polaroid factory, right when Steve Jobs was introducing the very first iPhone. And it takes a look at sort of the resurgence of vinyl and a few other things. And it's a bit of an underdog story. And it's with a real fascinating guy that we're following. It's shot on 35 millimeter, just in sort of the spirit of fighting against sort of the digital tide. And we sat down with writer and director Jens Meurer about the film. And I gushed a little too much on this one, I will admit, but it's a fantastic film that really speaks to sort of the need that we all have to sort of hold on to the real, especially as more and more of how we communicate and how we consume media and how we do a lot of things is translating over to the digital space. I mean, they can exist side by side, and it's important to hold on to some of those things. And we talked about that with Jens and so very much more in a fantastic talk, which I certainly hope you enjoy, because here it is. I think I fell in love with the movie. I mean, I love the idea of sort of re-embracing the tactile, sort of the actual, as opposed to, the stuff that exists in the cloud, which is part of sort of the digital nonsense that we're all sort of sifting through right now. I'm kind of curious, what was sort of the initial inspiration for you to not only tell the story, but also embrace sort of the older technologies like 35 and sort of, I can imagine you shooting on 35 was an extra conversation when you're raising money for something like this.
Well, let's put it this way. I didn't get into the story because I was like a Polaroid fanatic or something like that. Of course, I was used to it, and I grew up making films on film. But what really got me into the story was Doc's kind of relentless ability to stand up to the stupid stuff that we're inflicting on ourselves. There's nothing wrong with digital, and we all use it all the time, and we use our phones and car sharing and what have you. But here's this guy who is, and this, remember, was like 15 years ago when the iPhone first came out, and he was telling us slow down. You might want some of this stuff in the future. And everyone was salivating about getting that new smartphone and so on. And I just loved that there's somebody who was really looking the other way when we were looking this one way. And I had the sense, he might be on about something. I mean, when I met him, he had already started saving Polaroid. I mean, get this biologist from Vienna, who is the self-proclaimed #1 expert in spider eye muscles in the world. He's also the only expert in spider eye muscles in the world. He has this calling, I got to save Polaroid, who had just gone bankrupt and given themselves up for dead. And he did. So it was this mindset that I just had an inkling, well, maybe he's onto something. Maybe somewhere down the line, we'll be glad that some of this stuff has been saved or protected or rescued. And so it was more this swimming against the digital tide mindset that made me interested in him than the actual technologies.
Was he on board with you following him? Because, I mean, as a documentarian, I mean, he just felt like it must have been a dream subject just to have a chance to follow around. Did it take any arm twisting, or was he on board right away?
Oh, yeah. Very gentle arm twisting. This is the guy who said, I often tell stories that aren't 100% true, but this one is 150% true. So, no, he's not a shy little wallflower. But there's something about him. For me, he's a very Jacques Tati-esque character. He's a Monsieur Hulot. He started wearing this Polaroid jacket, which is not real. He had found a tailor in Hong Kong who remade these Polaroid like style jackets. And, so of course he is somebody, he is, I think, often performing, but he is doing that in real life. He'll walk down the street and chat up people and kind of persuade people to get with him wearing this jacket. And it's just, we need people like that in the world, I think.
When you're in the process of all this, are you sort of conscious of the whimsy that is kind of being created in terms of like saving Polaroid and just sort of the re-embracing of vinyl? Because, I mean, there is really the film has a very joyful sense to it that I really sort of embraced and took to heart. And I'm kind of curious, like, do you know you're generating these kind of things when you're in the moment shooting them?
Well, in a way, yes. I mean, this sounds really bonkers, probably. I think there is something political about this. So, clearly it's not a political film because it's not about climate change and it's not about refugees making it to Europe. But I do think there's something political about, okay, you're in Canada, you're kind of half okay. Look kind of the south of you. Look at what politics has become there. That's got to have something to do with that, all the social media, this digital existence that we live through Facebook and Google and so on is driving people apart. So I really liked the approach of showing that there is an alternative, that you can, do something that is warm and together. And I think the whole process of shooting a documentary on film where you're carting around a big camera and you have to stop people all the time because you've had a rollout and you've got to put in a new roll, it's very inclusive in a way. So the humor which exists around somebody like Doc and the other people in the film, and the somewhat light touch, I think for me is an antidote to this cold digital world that makes everyone be at each other's throats and so on, which is not how we should be, and that's not how we really are as humans. And listening to vinyl isn't going to be the answer to all of the problems in the world, but it's a good start.
It's a nice start, yeah. Can you talk a little bit just about the use of music in the film? Because, I mean, I really felt it add to not just the warmth of it, but, I mean, the style as well, because it really did make it feel, like you said, this very sort of warmer and more sort of inviting thing as opposed to this cold. Because you could have told this story in a very cold and sort of as a matter-of-fact kind of fashion, but you didn't. It really created this sense of warmth and inviting to sort of come inside and explore more.
Well, that's a good question. At the end of Social Dilemma, which I think is a really impressive film pointing out this very question, what's this world we live in? The guy says, what do we do? Well, what do? We look out the window and we can see, hey, the sun is shining out there. There's a beautiful world. That sounds stupid, but it's actually true. So I tried to incorporate that sense in the film as much as I could. So the music is not some techno, the world is scary stuff. It's actually a real jazz orchestra that I came across in Vienna. And I noticed I came across them because they're cutting tracks direct to disc, like one always has.
Yeah.
And we cooked up this plan that Sacha Paris, the composer, would actually compose the soundtrack to this documentary. And we'd film him as he is performing it. And we're cutting it straight to vinyl while he's performing the soundtrack of the film. And then, to go one step further, we felt, we should have a few songs. And we decided on a few songs, but we didn't really have anyone to sing them. And, the joys of the internet, my editor, Mike Nollett, and I were Googling, and we came across Haley Reinhardt, an American singer from Chicago and Los Angeles, who is one of the best voices around, and kind of in her own singing moved away from pop. She was an American Idol to she's just fantastic live. So I've sent an email saying, how do you fancy coming to an empty hotel in near Vienna where a 40-piece jazz orchestra will perform just once, there's no rehearsals, and it's economy? And she wrote back saying, this sounds utterly crazy, I'm coming. And that's what you see in the film. So, it's kind of method documentary filmmaking. You can see what we're doing.
Well,
that's mirroring his story, as in, let's see if it's possible or if it's not possible. All of this was shot by just candlelight, by the way.
Well, that's stunning in and of itself. But I think that's one thing that really sort of strikes me, because you're a filmmaker who has worked in documentary and worked in narrative, but documentary always seems to have a little bit more sort of flexibility and a little bit more freedom to play inside the box, as it were. And I'm kind of curious, or play outside the box, as it were. I'm kind of curious from your perspective, what is it about the documentary form that maybe allows a little bit more of a freewheeling sensibility?
Well, I think what you say applies to actual, let's call them theatrical or film documentaries, and not non-fiction reportage and so on. But I think it's a good point. And in a way, on the one hand, it's just easier dealing with the real world, because sometimes it does take you, we ended up filming inside Facebook in 2018 when the shit was really hitting the fan there, just because they liked that we're shooting on film. And if we were a news crew, they would have never let us in. And we didn't go down to the basement and filmed any Russians meddling with elections. It was a good visit. And that's kind of where documentaries do give you more freedom, because you can just get on with people. And you already mentioned my film is not it's not conflict driven. It's almost to show us that there is togetherness to be had as well. And I don't even think that's very typical for documentaries, but there's no screenplay, so I'm making it up as I go along, for better or for worse. And that is that freedom that you refer to.
How much of just having the oddity of the 35 millimeter rig looking around with you sort of opened doors for you? Because I can imagine, as just sort of a curiosity, it would be something that people would sort of lean in and allow you to lean in, just because it's something that's so unexpected and is almost, subverting, like it's almost inviting in a bit of a subvertive way, if that makes sense.
Well, the funny thing about shooting a documentary on 35 is it sort of really defeats conventional wisdom, which is like if you have a really tiny camera and you're fly on the wall and so on. And my experience is that unless you're filming underground in forbidden territory, it's actually really disconcerting for people when you have a really small camera. It's much better to come with the big rig, relatively big rig, and you have to explain what you're doing. They kind of become part of the process. And I think protagonists feel respected. And there's this weird thing. They just forget this whole camera is there with the first AD and the sound person and so on. And it becomes very free, but at the same time focused, because people after a while realize if they don't say what they want to say within 4 minutes, there's going to be a rollout and I'm saying enough. So they're more to the point. And so it becomes a more intimate process than when they're constantly looking around the room, where's the guy with the camera? Are they filming me now or not? So, for most people, don't get filmed in any way. So I don't know if the 35 thing is a novelty factor these days or this is the first time they're being filmed anyway. So ultimately, for us, it was a liberating experience to film, because you can't fall into the trap of just letting it roll and roll and roll. We had like an average of 8 short rolls a day, and when they've run through the camera, it's a wrap, and we go down to the pub. That's good for everyone.
Now, I'm curious, during this whole process, is there anything that surprised you along the way?
It surprised me how young a subject this was, because of course I'm not that young, and I've always had a record player. It surprised me when I learned, one of the places I wish I had filmed at, I visited it, was Jack White's record pressing plant in Detroit. And he's the first person to actually commission new machines for pressing records. And it just surprised me how young the audience was for this. And of course, for them, it's not nostalgia. It's not rediscovering analog technologies. It's discovering them in the first place. A Polaroid camera, I think to most of present day customers, is like a new piece of technology. And I've often come across people who thought Instagram had put out this physical product. And in a way, I think that's really hopeful. And I didn't bank on that. I thought the whole thing was more like, bearded vinyl record collectors like myself.
Well, I mean, and that's amazing. And I mean, it's one of those things I've always been really fascinated by, and I'm kind of curious on your perspective. Like as a human being, as a person, I've always felt the need, and I've always felt that having something like either a piece of art or work or something, being able to have that tactile connection to it was always so much more important. And I'm kind of curious, what's your perspective on just sort of our collective need for the tactile, which is something we don't always necessarily appreciate sort of in the conscious, but subconsciously, I think it's something that we all sort of really sort of crave and sort of need more than we think we do.
Yeah. Well, look, first of all, I'm not a Luddite. I have produced like digital, like like Russian Arc. But I think, the answer to your question is actually really super self-evident. I mean, we are analog human beings. We are analog beings. We have at least 5 senses. And this digital world into which we embarked for the time being only ever uses 2 of those, because it's hearing and seeing. It's always behind glass. You can never, I can't touch you now. I can't, there's no, yes, we have a connection, but it only goes this far.
This is the best we can do,
Yeah. And so I think there is an obvious and inbuilt yearning for tactile things. And you see in the film that Doc goes around and makes people smell vinyl records. And of course they do smell, maybe not well, but that's part of the experience. If you find an old one, you smell that the carton, that the sleeve, has become a bit smelly. It tells you something about the whole product. The fact that it costs more to make means that there's value in it, as opposed to something that is just streamed for free and everything's for free and easy and convenient. I think, in the New York Times, somebody called that the tyranny of convenience. And it's taking away important markers that actually we like, dogs going around sniffing and animals smelling and so on, we also need. So it's very basic, very obvious, and actually very necessary to keep these tactile things.
And it's one of those things, you can't explain the smell of a record store and how important it is to someone. You just have to let them experience it. And it's one of the things that, gets lost, but is getting, again, like you said, it's still out there. It's still craved. And this really feels to me like it's such a humanistic story. And I'm kind of curious, because you've been in this business a minute, you've done a variety of things. Can you think back to the younger days? Was there a moment in your life, or maybe like even a movie, that sort of was the linchpin for you to sort of go, you know what, I want to be a storyteller, I want to be in this business?
I don't know. I'm not sure I should answer this question, because the honest answer is it was sitting in the cinema and seeing Alan Parker's Fame, and I walked out saying, this is going to be my job.
I love it.
And then I went to university and I went to, journalism school in New York at Columbia, and I thought, my parents will be pleased I get a proper job. But this is a while ago. Halfway through, I figured, well, I'm not sure journalism is ever going to be a proper job again, so I might as well become a filmmaker. So thank you, Alan Parker. Rest in peace.
That's a fantastic answer, by the way. Now, just to start putting a bow on this, and I mean, this is a bit of a loaded question, but I'm kind of curious about it because this is a film that obviously is sort of embracing a little bit of nostalgia, but like I said, we've said, it's embracing the tactile, it's embracing the need for sort of the physical. But I'm kind of curious on your feelings, because on one end, this is a film shot on 35, very tactile, about tactile things, but it's going into a digital space. Like it almost feels like it's conflicting against itself in many ways. I'm curious on your perspective on that.
Yeah. Look, I think this is actually the most important question, because it's really not a kind of crusade for nostalgia. And let's all go back to what it was 40 years ago or 100 years ago.
Sure,
I think this is all about having the chance to put the best of two worlds together. There are a zillion things. Look at the, the corona circumstances we live in. There's a zillion things where digital opens up the world and offers possibilities. But without retaining some of the stuff that we want and need and that is good, and we might not even see it so much this year, but in 5 years' time, as happened with vinyl, we'll see it. And without people who fight for preserving this, or who are crazy enough to keep believing in it, the world would be a much poorer place. And I think actually what you see in politics at the moment is an example of that happening. Social media has become so good at causing division and real hatred left, right, and center. And I think that's what is sort of the message of my film. It's not like nostalgia and everything was better. It's like, here are various elements, and we got to keep them all going and kind of use the best of them and make sure that we have choices moving forward. And that's, for me, a very modern and forward-looking agenda, and not at all nostalgia. Of course, I'm nostalgic for 70s rock music or whatever, but that's not what we're doing here. When the soundtrack gets recorded onto vinyl here, it's a very young singer, and the fact that she's somebody who just has this ability is forward-looking. That's modern. That's today, and that's where I see my film.
No, and I think you're absolutely right, because I mean, to me, it is one of those things where you can't forget what was in order to appreciate where we're going. And I mean, and like you say, in social media, in politics, it's about the now. It's not about sort of embracing, trying to find that middle ground and sort of bring in the old and the new to make sort of a better tomorrow. It's just about, that was bad, this is good, black and white, there is no gray. But the world is a shade of gray, and life is a shade of gray. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. And I mean, I think your film really does highlight that beautifully. And I just want to say thank you for the time, and thank you for the film, man. I absolutely loved it. This was a delight.
Thank you, David. Spread the word, please.
I will, for sure.
We're caught in this fucking digital realm at the moment. I want people to see this film in the cinema. We have 35mm prints, and we're hoping to be coming back with those to North America later in the year.
I will be championing this for the rest of the year for sure. But thank you again for the time, Jens. This was a lot of fun.
And you, David.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.